Welcome back. We are in conversation with Director General of WTO, Roberto Azevedo. Let me now talk to you about what India is saying. Of course, you must have read it in the press. India maintains that you cannot cherry pick some of the what is known as new issues. You have to first focus on the development agenda, which is the Doha development agenda. How would you react to that?
I think India knows very well what's going in Geneva, knows what its priorities are. It's perfectly legitimate to prioritize the areas that are of interest to India. Everybody cherry picks. Everyone. To the extent that you have preferences in one area or another, you are cherry picking.
Yes.
But the cherry picking of the others is always more annoying than your own cherry picking. But I think in general, India is being pragmatic like everybody else, and I think India has its priorities. I think one great priority for India is food security, and it has made quite clear in the WTO that that's a big priority for India, and I think members respect that. I definitely respect that, and I think that that's something that we should be working very hard to deliver.
On that, we have been speaking to Trade Minister Sitaraman here, and she, along with her colleagues from other developing countries, maintained that on the specific issue of stock holding, for example, they have not seen much traction at the WTO talks on finding a permanent solution. Do you see that happening in the near future? Do you see any traction in talks on that?
We have a mandate. We have a mandate on public stock holding to finalize negotiations by the end of the year. So I would love to see that moving faster than it is at this point in time, but both sides are not really moving that much, and I think that has to change between now and December if we want to see those outcomes happening. As far as I am concerned, I will be trying my best to facilitate this conversation, to encourage people to put ideas on the table, to find clever ways of overcoming the gap and the difficulties that exist. But in every single negotiation, there are gaps, there are obstacles. We have to find ways, creative ways of overcoming them, and I think that's the challenge. Difficult to predict how far we can go, but I think we should do our very best to get it done.
Right. Okay. Let me get a sense from you regarding the Doha development agenda. One conversation which has emerged from developed countries, is that why should countries like India, China, or Indonesia, these fast growing countries, should be given a special treatment per se? Why shouldn't they be treated at par with industrialized nations? I mean, the technical term being graduation. Graduate these countries from being a special and differential treatment to bringing it at par with industrial nations. Do you think that this sort of a attitude could actually lead to another stalemate, or do you think that there is, these countries would be willing to talk on these issues raised by certain countries?
I think it's much easier if you try to look at the world as developed and developing, like two blocks. It's a simple vision, it's a simple approach. In reality, it's not like that. Even among developed countries, they have very different perceptions. You're saying developed countries want to do this. I mean, some developed countries want to do that. Other developed countries are more nuanced in how they want to approach that. Some show more flexibility. It's not a single uniform view on that side. Same thing happens for developing countries. Not all developing countries think alike. It's very simple to say developing countries want this. No. Some developing countries want this. Others are more nuanced about how they do things. Clearly, you cannot compare the big emerging economies with Botswana or Zimbabwe. These are different countries with different needs, with different specificities. At the same time, you cannot ignore that these big emerging economies are still developing economies with very present problems of a developing country. And I think we have to be more sophisticated in this conversation to recognize those specificities, recognize those special needs, and find ways of bridging the gaps that exist today.
Right. Okay, let's now shift the conversation towards some global events that has happened. One is regarding Brexit. There is a trade negotiation which is supposed to happen between UK and EU, but such negotiations are extremely complex. Do you think it is realistic to expect a trade treaty between UK and EU in just a couple of years? Don't you think it will take some more time to actually finalize a trade treaty if it happens?
I get that question a lot, and I have to tell you, my answer is I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. A lot of it depends on those two blocks. So the UK and the EU, they will have to sit down, talk, and try to see what will be the terms of engagement after the divorce. And that will be fundamental. Now, depending on the approach from both sides, you can have a quick deal. Depending also on another type of approach, it can take a long time. I don't know. This is something that we're not involved with. The WTO is not involved with this conversation between those two, one country and one bloc of countries. But I think to the extent that we can, we will facilitate if they need our help in technical cooperation or assistance or whatever it is to help sort things out. I don't think they do. They're very competent. But the less turbulence we have in this process, the better for the global economy. I think we don't need more turbulence at this point in time.
Okay. If there is a hard Brexit without a trade deal, could it disrupt trade flows? Is there a risk?
Well, some people talk about hard Brexit in different ways. They mean different things when they say that. I understand hard Brexit would mean the UK and the EU do not have a preferential arrangement between the two, and that the UK will rely on the terms of trade that every other WTO member does.
Yes.
Right? So, no, that's the rules are there. They know exactly what would happen if that were the situation. So that's pretty predictable, actually.
Now, last couple of questions, and let's now talk about United States. We have seen how the Trump administration is moving out of the TPP, how it is seeking to renegotiate the NAFTA, how it is basically seeking to, put curbs on movement of people, basically the visa curbs. But as a proponent of, again, free trade and services, how do you look at these developments which have happened after the Trump administration took over?
I think the first thing to do is give them time to get a trade team in place. They don't have it yet. The USTR is still lacking confirmation. It's a process that's ongoing. The whole team is still being set up. We need to see how all those ideas, those concepts would be transformed into trade policy. I heard concerns about unfair trade. Well, that's fair. Everybody is against unfair trade. It's how you deal with these problems, and I think the WTO has many tools to help handle these situations.
So you'll rather wait and watch and see what kind of policy?
I think so, and they're talking about renegotiating deals that were done by previous administrations. I don't think they were well negotiated. That's also not the first time that I hear that. I hear that from many countries saying, wow, the previous administration negotiated badly and things like that. Well, it's fair. Let's see what that means in practice once that becomes trade policy.
But given the fact that several developing nations and big emerging economies are looking inwards and protecting their domestic turf, is there a possibility of an all-out trade war in the future in terms of putting in curbs, putting in policies which hinder movement of
so far that has not been the case. This movement of looking inward began in 2008, right after the financial crisis. At that point in time, there were a lot of things made nationally or made domestically, made here. That was very common in many different countries in the world. And despite all that, the trade rules of the WTO helped to hold back protectionist measures that were inconsistent with the multilateral agreements, with what we had in terms of disciplines. And that is very different from what happened before in the 1930s when there were no disciplines and the trade war escalated very quickly. They wiped out 2/3 of trade in 3 years. This is not happening now, and I think the WTO is there precisely to help hold back these protectionist trends.
My last issue, sir, is regarding the global trade outlook. Last year we had perhaps one of the worst years in terms of global trade growth since the 2009 financial crisis. Will 2017 be a bit better, or what is the sense that you are getting?
It may be better. This last year we are expecting to confirm growth around 1.7%. For this year, we are expecting something between 1.8 and 3.1, depending on how things evolve. So it tends to be a little better. But whatever happens there, it will still be below the historic trend, which means that we still depend on better numbers for economic growth if we want to see bigger trade expansion.
So there are downside risks to global trade?
Always.
So let's hope that 2017 turns out to be a better year for global trade. Thank you so much for joining CNBC TV 18. That was Roberto Azevedo, Director General of World Trade Organization, in conversation with CNBC TV 18. Thanks for watching.